What if I told you that there was a film that would make you hate horror films? Not because it was so violent, but because it would make you personally dislike an entire genre of cinema. If such a film exists, it is this one, Funny Games. When this film was first shown in Cannes in 1997, a third of the audience walked out of the theater. And I don't think that these people walked out because they thought that the film was bad. I think that these people walked out because they did not like this film's message. And today I think it would just be a cool little thing to just kind of wade into this, cesspool. With that being said, there is a little bit of self-selection going on in this video, in that if you haven't already seen the film and you're intrigued by this proposal, stop this video and go and watch it. However, it should be noted I am talking about the 1997 German original version of this film, because this film was remade exactly 10 years later by the same director in English. It is just kind of missing something. It just kind of needs some Europeanness. With that being said, we're going to dive right into the plot. Usually I don't like, going line by line on the plot, but in this film it is necessary, which you will see in just a minute. So the film starts out with a family listening to classical music in a car as they drive towards a vacation spot, for it only to be cut short by the title sequence, immediately interrupting it with this absolutely atonal metal music. Probably our first sign that things are maybe not going to be the way that we think it is. Regardless, they arrive at their vacation house and they're introduced to their neighbors, who seem to have two young male guests over for the day. And as the family gets settled into the house, one of the neighbors brings over one of those young men, who they introduce as Paul. But the day goes on and the family settles into the house. George and Georgie, who are the husband and son of the family, go out and work on the boat, while the wife Anna is in the kitchen preparing a meal. While this is going on, the other male guest from the other house comes over and introduces himself as Peter, saying that he needs to borrow some eggs for the neighbor. Anna obliges and gives him some eggs, and then he immediately just drops them, and he's like, oops, could I get some more eggs? She does. And then he immediately drops those, and he's like, hey, could I get some more eggs? And the other guy that we saw earlier, Paul, comes in and asks, hey, can I try out your golf clubs? And he goes out, and we hear the dog barking, and then the dog just stops barking. Don't know what that could be. But they're very much just like imposing themselves on the family, and like Anna's, trying to get them out, but they just keep, getting up in their personal space. And Peter accidentally pushes her cell phone into the sink, thus, rendering it useless. And this all builds up to a point where Anna demands that Peter and Paul leave. And then at this point, George and Georgie also show up. Anna demands that her husband, kick him out. And he's like, we didn't do anything, can you just give us some eggs? And some insults are thrown, and then Peter takes the golf club and breaks George's leg with it. So not exactly getting off to a great start for our summer vacation. And as the tone of this interaction has completely changed, and, the family is becoming aware that oh, these guys are kind of keeping us hostage, they also notice that, hey, the dog has stopped barking. What did you guys do with it? So Paul takes Anna outside and leads her on a guessing game of, hot and cold, trying to figure out where they've placed the dog. As while this is going on and Anna is looking for the dog, Paul turns around to the camera and gives us, the audience, one of these. And this wink is one of the most infamous scenes in the entire film, as it very much is this thing of did he just do that? Did we seriously just see that? And with Paul and Peter now in control, they say that they would like to play a little game. A game where they bet whether or not they, Paul and Peter, or them, the family, will still be alive at 9 o'clock the next morning. Which is where we get another fourth wall break, where Paul looks around to the camera and says, yeah, you're probably wanting them to survive, right? And as the film progresses, we very much are getting, the plot line ostensibly, of what this film should be about, these funny games that these psychopaths are playing, where they're putting the bag over the kid's head and we'll kill him unless if you strip for us. It's not playing out exactly in the way that any true horror film would do that. In that scene, it never actually shows any nudity. It is just a close-up on all of the characters' faces of this just, complete humiliation that is going on for no reason. Once again, this is just, a sick game. And it's also at this point that we start to figure out that like maybe Paul and Peter are completely not their names, because they're also calling each other Tom and Jerry, Beavis and Butthead. There's just a real sense that like, nothing that these characters are saying is actually true. At one point, Peter says that, oh, I was bullied and maybe my mom didn't love me, or, maybe I'm addicted to drugs. Some kind of, excuse for like why I'm like this, because they're like, why are you like this? But as it goes on, the tone is very much such that like, it seems that none of this really matters. Like this is all just like, yeah, I'm just saying these things because, why not? At some point, Georgie is able to escape the house and Paul goes out searching for him. Georgie runs over to the neighbors that we saw earlier and finds out they've been killed, presumably, by Peter and Paul. Georgie searches around that house and finds a shotgun. Paul comes in and confronts him. Georgie tries to shoot Paul, but the gun is unloaded. So Paul brings both Georgie and the shotgun back to the house. And at that point, they begin to play a counting game wherein Peter is supposed to count to some number and then choose who they are going to kill next. As this game is going on, the camera pans to Paul, who goes into the kitchen to make himself some food, and we hear a shotgun blast in the next room, but it never cuts back to that room, just staying on Paul, just making that BLT. When Paul does come back in, with his sandwich of course, he just berates Peter. He's like, what the heck did you do? You were supposed to, stretch this out a little bit longer for the plot and entertainment value. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And thus, being frustrated with the situation, both Peter and Paul decide to leave the house. After that, you have possibly the single most brutal scene that I have ever saw in a film, of just an unbroken shot of the family room in the aftermath of what just happened, with Anna and George just weeping. George and Anna try and figure out what they should do next, and then Anna decides, okay, well, I'll just try and escape and try and get a hold of the police or somebody, and makes it out to the street. However, as she does, she waves down a car, and who is in that car? None other than Peter and Paul, who bring her back to the house where they continue their funny games. As the next game that Peter and Paul are trying to play is they're trying to make Anna choose between using a shotgun or a knife to kill either her or George first, and by what method. And they're like, you have to say this prayer. Okay, now actually say this prayer backwards. And as this is going out, in the confusion of the moment, Anna reaches out and grabs a hold of the shotgun and shoots Peter, which is the only true on-screen like bloody death of the entire movie. And then we get what is possibly the most shocking scene just in film, like period. Paul reaches out, rips the shotgun from her hand, and searches around for the remote, and then grabs the TV remote in the living room and presses the reverse button. And the film that you have been watching, Funny Games, stops and goes in reverse until we get to the point before Anna has shot Peter, and then the scene plays out again, and then Paul grabs the gun before Anna is able to get it. When I was watching this film, I literally did have the jaw drop moment of I could not believe what was happening before my eyes. And so in the aftermath of that, they decide to just shoot George, and they take Anna out onto the boat, and they go out onto the lake, and they're talking about some metaphysical sci-fi plot. And Paul's like, oh yeah, what time is it? And Peter's like, oh, it's like 8 a.m. And then Paul just, reaches back and pushes Anna into the lake, just thus killing her. And Peter's like, why would you do that? We still had an hour, to play with her before the bet went out. And Paul was like, yeah, I was just getting hungry. And so they laugh about it and head into dock. And once the boat is docked, they get out onto the shore and walk up to the back door of this house that they just showed up at. And it turns out that the house that they are at is, of course, the family friends of the family that they just, murdered. And then Paul was like, hey, can I have some eggs? And then gives us, the audience, one of these. So if I had to give like a sentence review of like what this film is about, I would say that it is about how it is a moral failing of the audience that we like horror films, specifically the violence in them. Now, I know that may seem a little bit, hyperbolic or preachy even, but that's really kind of the takeaway, because as we dive into Funny Games, it becomes apparent that it is on so many levels identical to these classic slasher films. The trope codifier of the slasher film being, of course, Halloween, which is about, the evil coming to normalcy. There's this killer who's coming to this completely stock standard small town. Oh no, what will happen? In much of the same way, it's, hey, these two psychopaths are coming into, your house. And the knowing playing with these tropes is shown with their names, in that, these guys are just archetypes. They're literally just placeholders for these tropes that we use to tell these stories. They're Beavis and Butthead, they're Tom and Jerry. It's just, straight man, funny man, skinny man, fat man. It doesn't really matter. They're not, real characters. We're gonna give them these completely fake, tales of woe for their backstory, but it's not gonna matter because, they're not going to act like, Jason Voorhees in these films. And the main way in which it's going to be different is that, when they're going to, do murder, you're not going to like it. I know you may be like, but I don't like the murderer. It's but we do kind of like the villain as the audience. They're just generally more interesting than the actual protagonist, allegedly, of the story. They're the reason why they wind up on the t-shirts. Because while, yes, they're killing these people, they kind of look cool. And we as a society are just generally okay with violence being portrayed as long as it is in a very sanitized way. In Halloween, Michael Myers kills like a busload of, teenagers, but, who cares, because there is no blood in the film. And the film is all okay because, Laurie Strode, the final girl, is able to escape. And you can contrast this trope of the final girl in Funny Games, and whereas in any other film, she of course escapes and the bad guys, get caught. In this film, they get off completely scot-free and they push her off the back of the boat with complete nonchalance because, who cares? It's the end of the movie. I think it's very telling that all of the exploitation essentially for the film that the killers do takes place off screen. The one time that we do get a kill on camera, we immediately get it taken away by Paul, who rewinds the scene. So thus, any escapism that we're getting from, the movie, and oh yeah, she's finally got it, she's gonna get the bad guys. It's no. You don't get that. This is not what this film is all about. The director said that when that scene happened in theaters, audience would applaud whenever she got the shotgun. But as soon as, the rewind happened, it would just be dead silence because they were completely just destroyed. In fact, I'm just going to let him explain in his own words what he thinks that the film is about.
Parce que je fais du spectateur le complice du tueur, et à la fin, je lui reproche cette position. C'est un peu sarcastique, mais je voulais montrer comment on se trouve toujours comme complice de tueur si on regarde des films de cette sorte. Pas de cette sorte, un film autoréflexif comme celui-ci, mais dans des films qui montrent la violence d'une manière acceptable. On est toujours d'accord que la violence se passe, qu'elle est consommable, et on ne se rend pas compte qu'on est le complice de ça. Et ça, je voulais montrer.
One of the cliche complaints that people often have about slasher films is that these are just films about glorifying senseless violence. But the thing is this film is pointing a finger back at everybody, being like, no, this film is about violence. And we're going to show that by giving you a film that is truly about meaningless, senseless violence. We're going to have these two young guys wearing white, having the names of Catholic saints, and they're just going to kill this family, particularly no reason. It's not for money, it's not for revenge, it's just because maybe it's for fun, but also maybe not, because, who cares? And this is why I think so many people walked out of this film, because this is very much holding a mirror up to the audience and being like, yeah, this is what you like. They're stretching it on throughout the entire film of why don't you kill us? And Peter and Paul are like, yeah, we're not going to because of the entertainment value. And then the knowing glance over to us, the audience, being like, this is what you want, right? And it's also this self-selection bias where the only types of people who would watch this film are exactly who this film is for. Because if you didn't really know anything about film, you would be like, I didn't get it, so you would just walk out. But also, if watching horror films is a load-bearing column of your personality, you are going to hate this because you're like, this is condescending. When actually it's just like, no, this is actually what you are getting out of these films emotionally. And that hard face-to-face with reality is just brutal. And of course there are other films that are like very much pastiches of like the slasher genre. Scream is the obvious example, but Scream is also still trying to give you a good horror movie. This is not this movie. This is not trying to give you a good film. This is trying to give you a real film. So in this film, whenever they give you, you know, the classic slasher ending where like, you know, the killers are still out when he asks for more eggs, there's no satisfaction in it. It's not like the, ooh, you know, that means we're going to get a sequel. It's like, oh my God, you know, we are like bad people. And sometimes that's what watching a film is all about, you know, just to feel terrible. So if you are a true, you know, horror film buff and you do just love watching these movies, maybe watch this film and love what you love a little bit less. But if you do want to watch something that you will love, watch this video.